not that somebody was bad to you. It's not that. It's that the system in which you live doesn't provide that anymore. You can deport every poor soul that the ICE folks beat up, and you will not change the economic problems of the United States.
Richard Wolff warns, watch this before they delete it. The United States is facing deep, systemic economic problems that threaten to upend its prosperity if left unaddressed.
I don't think people are born stupid and live their lives that way. I think it's a problem. If people are behaving in a way that strikes us as stupid, the logical next question in my mind is, why are they behaving that way? What's producing it? And there I have an enormous feeling of empathy and sympathy for the American people. They have really been sold a bill of goods for a long time now. They've been told that the American dream, the idea that if you work hard in school and do reasonably well, you will get a good job and you'll be able to start a family and raise a family and live a decent life and retire and have time for yourself. All of those things, the car in the garage, the chicken in the pot, the vacation by the lake, all of those things. I remember as a child, I was born in Ohio, I grew up there.
Richard Wolff asserts that Americans were promised certain benefits if they played by the rules, yet those promises have not been fulfilled.
These are the things we thought we would get if we played by the proverbial rules. Well, for most of the American people, the statistics are crystal clear. That promise that you would have that, you can look forward to it. It would be the reward for your work, your study, your applying yourself, all of that. That was a lie. They haven't delivered. It's not that somebody was bad to you. It's not that. It's that the system in which you live doesn't provide that anymore. Not to you and not to most of the people. The top 20% in this country live that story. That's why they believe it's still true. And they don't want to face the fact that for 80% of the people, it isn't true anymore. And there's no prospect of it coming back.
Richard Wolff thinks that for the American people, it's been a shock to realize that such an economic breakdown was even possible.
I think for the American people, to put it in a nutshell, it's been a shock to face that was even possible. No one told them you might not be able to get a job, or you might not get a job that pays you enough to ever settle down. You can't have a family, you can't have children, you can't. At every turn, even if no one says it in your face, you face it anyway. And that's a shock. And I'm not surprised that people who are in a shock don't pay close attention to that barker you talked about, who says, I know what the problem is. For example, the problem is those immigrants. Oh my God, we're going to have that one run against us again? Country after country for centuries gets itself into a difficulty and blames whoever is the latest arrival, the immigrant. As I like to remind Americans, we are a nation of 330 million people. That's pretty big. The total number of undocumented immigrants in this country, according to Mr. Trump's own figures, are about 11 million at the most. There is no way. I'm a professor of economics. Take my word, please.
Richard Wolff argues there's no way 11 million of the poorest people in the world are shaping the economy of 330 million Americans.
There's no way that 11 million of the poorest people in the world are shaping the economy of 330 million Americans. Anyone who says that is, I'm going to be real nice, out of touch with reality. That's make-believe. But you know, if you're shocked, if you're really upset that you haven't been able to give to your children the kind of future you and everyone else promised them, you might be tempted to believe that if only you could get rid of the immigrants, why then everything will change. Let me assure you, you can deport every poor soul that the ICE folks beat up, and you will not change the economic problems of the United States. Not only that, you'll probably make them worse. And you know why? Because the immigrants do the work of this country. They pick the fruits, they wash your car, they do the things at the bottom, as immigrants always do. And they get paid very poorly. And if you don't have 11 million of like those people doing those jobs, which is what most of them do, well, you're going to have to pay real money to American citizens to do it. And you know what happens to the price of the banana you eat or the apple that got picked for you? You're going to have to pay more for it because the wages are going to go up. Hello, have you thought about that? Deporting immigrants is an inflationary act. It may look good on TV. It may get Mr. Trump the votes of shocked, upset people looking for something they can do. But it is not a problem solver, and it will come back to haunt us in many ways as the story of our cruelty right now to immigrants will be told and retold in the future of this country.
Richard Wolff explains that China developed an economic system aimed at doing what every other poor country in the world has long tried to do: rapidly lift itself out of poverty and into modern prosperity.
I'm not naive. I understand societies have problems, they have strengths, they have weaknesses. None of them is all good and none of them is all bad. And if you don't understand that, then I think you haven't been paying much attention in the way that you said earlier. Having put that forward real quick, China developed an economic system trying desperately to do what every other poor country in the world has been trying to do, at least for the last century, if not much longer. And that is to stop being poor. 50 years ago, China would have been at the top of the list of the poorest places on this planet, and they wanted to get out of it. And one of the things they did is look long and hard at the United States as an example, because the United States began as a pretty poor country, an unimportant corner of the British Empire, and look what it became over the 200 years of its independent history. And that impressed the Chinese as it has impressed people around the world, and for good reason. The standard of living in this country was raised remarkably in those 200 years that are just over now. But the Chinese, unlike the other parts of the world, actually figured it out. They figured out how to raise the standard of living of their people. And here comes the part Americans have so much trouble with. They figured out how to do it better than we did it, which, by the way, shouldn't upset you. That's the history of the world. The new generation hopefully learns from the older generation. The later effort learns from the earlier effort how to do it better. We used to call that progress, and that's what it is. The Chinese figured out, don't have an economic system in which everything is run by private enterprises, because they mainly do what's good for the profits they're in business to get. You've got to have a whole bunch of ways of doing things that are not held hostage to profit. There are a lot of things society needs that aren't profitable to produce. And if you don't have some solution to that, you do without those. And the argument of the Chinese is that's why we have this state sector. We have the government own and operate enterprises. Why would the United States attack every other country in the world with tariffs, threaten them? It's going to try to shift the burden of that tariff onto somebody else.
Richard Wolff warns that people have no idea what's about to happen after what Trump just did with tariffs, a move that could jolt the entire global economy.
Part of me can't quite believe what this government is trying to put over on the mass of the American people. The nerve they have to try, if they're having some success, I'm amazed at that. And I'm confident, I really am, that in a very short time, and I'm counting in terms of weeks and months, this is going to come back, what they are doing, to bite them in the rear end in a way that will be even more amazing to folks like us than what they've already done. It's really extraordinary. Let me start a little bit with some of the economics, since that's what I know best.
This business of slapping tariffs while the whole world threatens and demands they be lifted is a dangerous game, one that can spiral fast.
This business of heaving tariffs at everybody in the world, threatening and demanding that they come, just as Mr. Lula refused to do, and as the Chinese laugh at every time he does it, as if the world wants to come and get on its knees and beg the dear Mr. Trump to give them a break. I understand why he loves it. That's who he is. That's his politics. That's what the people who support him like to see him do. But in terms of an economic policy, let me give you just a little idea, if you haven't figured it out for yourself, of what's going on here. First of all, you should have noticed by now, even if you don't think there is a world outside the United States, that Mr. Trump has attacked.
In economic terms, no country on the planet wants tariffs. Everyone fears the backlash, but no one wants to be the first to blink.
In economic terms, every other country on the planet. Nobody does that. Nobody ever has done that. That is
nobody's dead orange either.
Yeah, it's off the wall. It's off the wall. It means, let's be real clear, if you put a tariff on, that's a tax. Never mind the funny story we ought to be telling each other here in America, where we've watched the Republican Party be the party against taxes for the last century. The party that prides itself on always cutting them or lowering them or opposing them. A tariff is a tax, which means the leader of the Republican Party is slapping the whole world with taxes. That's what this is. This is the anti-tax party having made an absolute U-turn to be the big tax party. And in case, again, people are a little fooled by his rhetoric, when he says, I'm going to hit China with a tax, be very careful here. The tariff that Mr. Trump creates doesn't hit China. U.S. tariffs are paid by U.S. businesses, not by Chinese businesses or Chinese people, none of that. Every one of the taxes, no matter what country it is thrown up against in his language, is a tax on American businesses. It's payable when you bring anything produced outside the United States into the United States to be sold. And that's 90% companies that do that. There are some individuals, but it's mostly a company business.
These companies now have to pay the overseas supplier for what they import, plus the tariff to Uncle Sam, costs that hit twice before the product even hits the shelf.
So then the real question is, these companies now have to pay the overseas source of whatever they bring in, plus the tariff to Uncle Sam. And it's now in the billions of dollars. Well, then the logical question, just ask yourself, what is the American business that has to pay the tax to Uncle Sam going to do about the fact that their profits are hurt because in addition to buying whatever they sell in America from abroad, they have to pay Uncle Sam a brand new tax once that tariff is in effect? Well, I'll tell you what the American corporation is going to do. It's going to try to shift the burden of that tariff onto somebody else, just like they try to shift every other cost that they have onto whoever they sell the output to. And you know who that is? You and me. We're going to be stuck with rising prices just as soon as Americans have used up all of the inventory they built up over the last 6 months, watching Mr. Trump threaten tariffs on the whole world. Once they've used up those goods bought before the tariffs hit, then you're going to see the rising prices. And they're going to hurt Mr. Trump because, remember, he campaigned on promising the opposite, lower prices. They're not going lower. Have you seen a lot of them go lower? You haven't, because they don't. You're going to see them go much higher as the businesses offload the burden of those tariffs. It is amazing to watch the nonsense being spoken about how wonderful these are without anyone simply taking the public through the simple economics of what a tariff is and how it works.
Richard wondered why the United States would attack every other country in the world with tariffs, picking a fight on all fronts at once.
It's like, again, asking yourself, gee, why would the United States attack every other country in the world with tariffs, threaten them, tell them, look, you're going to have a hard time because American businesses are not going to want to have to pay a tariff. So they won't buy from you, they'll go somewhere else. And don't think they're going to all produce here in the United States. That's another make-believe Mr. Trump specializes in. I'm going to bring business back to America. No, you're not. You haven't done it yet. You didn't do it in your first presidency, and you're not going to do it now. And the reason, again, is simple. If Mr. Trump is enraging leaders around the world, and believe me, he is, every one of them, some of them have the courage to stand up and say so, like Mr. Lula in Brazil. Most of them say it to each other, say it to their local citizenry. Every leader on earth discovering that the country is subject to a tariff, which will make it harder for the producers in that country to sell in America because Americans have to pay that tax on what those countries sell. So they know it'll hurt them. They'll lose some business. And you know what every leader is going to do in the world? What they're already doing? Good leaders, bad leaders, those in between. They're doing exactly what you would expect. They're blaming the United States for their economic troubles. Even if that's only part of the reason, they now have a scapegoat. Mr. Trump has handed them that on a platter. So we have the world's leaders every day explaining to their people why the economic problems they face are caused by the United States. The cost of that to the future of this country exceeds by far everything Mr. Trump has promised. In short, it's all a con. Over the last 30 years, how every month the inequality gets worse. You know, most Americans understand that inequality is a fundamental problem in every society.
Richard Wolff declares most people have no idea that every month inequality gets worse. The gap widens quietly, but relentlessly.
If you're wondering, why on earth would we live in an economy in which we know how many people don't have enough to get by, we see them on the street, we talk about them in the homeless encampments that exist in every American city, how would it be possible that someone who already has more money than we can understand gets another $27 billion on top of it? That's crazy. That's obscene. And why does Mr. Tesla get it? Because he's doing such a good job with the Tesla company? The Tesla company is running into the toilet. Its stocks are worth much less today than they were 2 months ago, 4 months ago, 6 months ago, and so on.
The whole world knows the mess Elon Musk made of Twitter when he bought it. A takeover that became a cautionary tale.
It's a company in terrible trouble, and the whole world knows what a disaster Mr. Elon Musk made out of Twitter when he bought it. He hasn't shown that above all other uses that $27 billion could have been put to in this earth we live on, we're giving it to this man who just did an awful job on the two larger corporations he's associated with. This is nuts. You know what we need? I got it. A statistic which exists, which tells us how unequal incomes are in our society. We're much more interested in that, in who's rich and who's poor. We pay a lot of attention. It's very important to most of us to have some sense of it, for ourselves, for our neighbors, for our family, for our children, and all the rest. And you know, if you do a lot of work, which people like me do, you can go find the statistics, but you won't hear about them on the radio hardly ever, maybe a couple times a year, but you'll hear about employment statistics every couple of weeks.
Richard claims employers care most about how much hiring is happening, a pulse check on the economy they can't ignore.
What's that about? Employers are interested in how much hiring is going on. Can they fire workers and find other ones quickly? They have interests in that, and that's why we get it. And you and I have interest in how unequal is the pie cut up amongst us. Is it justified? Is it getting worse? Are the rich getting richer? A clue, they are. And they have been for 40 years, but you don't hear very much about it, and you certainly don't get the weekly or monthly update the way you do about the unemployment statistics. No, unemployment isn't something that we put there every week or month because it's the most important. It isn't. It never was. It's useful for employers. And it's also useful not to let people know, which we could have, and we should have over the last 30 years, how every month the inequality gets worse. Because you know, most Americans understand that inequality is a fundamental problem in every society. And if that problem is getting worse, in good years and bad with Republicans and Democrats, wow, then maybe there's something fundamental going on which we don't want the results of.
And that's why we don't hear about income distribution, or how people with college degrees make far more than those without. The focus stays where they want it.
And that's why we don't hear about the distribution of income. Are people with a college degree getting much more money than people without it? Are people with skills, and if so, what kind, getting more money? Here's an important one that people like me are really interested in. How is it going for people whose income depends on the work they do, the wage they get paid, the salary they get paid for the work they're hired to do, versus the income of people who don't get income from their labor, often because they don't do any. They get income from the property they own. If they own money, they lend it and they get interest. That's their income. If they own land, they let people use it. They get a rent. That's their income. If they have money to buy shares of stock, they make that money available to the companies whose stock they buy. They get dividends. We might want to know, are the people who earn money by labor getting less and less, while the people who earn not by their labor but by what they own, often what they inherited from grandma, doing that? We might want to know whether we live in that kind of economy. By the way, it is getting worse in just that way, and that's a good reason why you don't hear about it unless people like me, and I'm not the only one, do the work, gather the numbers, process them, interpret them, so you can see that you get much better insight if you use other statistics.
When an economist says the economy's doing well and points to certain statistics, you have to ask, are they showing the whole picture or just cherry-picking the numbers that fit the story?
And now the final punchline. When you hear an economist say, the economy is doing real well, and then they point at some statistics, always ask yourself, are they cherry-picking which statistics to look at? Are they asking the questions about the economy that you and people like you are interested in? Or are the statistics serving somebody else? Mr. Trump has had a problem in the last 6 months. Let me take that back. He's obviously had lots of problems. But one of the problems he had was he kept saying the economy's great, the economy's great. And every poll of the mass of the people in America said the economy's not very good, the economy's not. And he couldn't understand how the people don't, what's the matter with people? Are they stupid? No, Mr. President, they aren't. But they look at different statistics from those you and the people you hire look at. And that was true before you fired the one who didn't give you the employment numbers you want. Don't be fooled, my friends. There's an old saying, the statistics may not lie, but the statisticians, those who gather them, those who process them, and those who interpret them, surely can and surely do. That's why you have to know what's going on. Talk to people who will explain to you what the different statistics are. The metaphor I like, that I use to teach when I'm in the classroom, is this. Imagine going to a doctor and saying, I haven't been feeling real well, doc. Take a look at me and give me an idea of what might be a problem. And suppose all he did was stick a thermometer under your tongue, measure your temperature, tell you it was 98.6, and sent you home, you're fine. You'd know, wouldn't you, that you probably need a different doctor. Why? Because you've heard about blood tests and x-rays and all kinds of other tests that doctors do. Because looking at only one fact, your temperature, or only one measurement, is never appropriate if there are many that you can access. And then what you want the doctor to do is tell you honestly, here are some things that are looking good in your test results, and here are some things that aren't.